So our next session is on UI and UX. Let me bring in the new speakers. So welcome to Olga, welcome to Alina, who I'm also going to make sure is unmuted. Oh, she's muted, that's fine. So hi, Olga and Alina. So I got a chance to get a sneak peek of this talk, and I was really excited about it because it covered loads of things which really interest me. Things like how do you decide how to expose a particular feature? How do you think about the workflow of the developer as they're trying to do the things they try to do, and like how and why might you want to change the workflow of a particular feature? So I think I'm looking forward to this talk again. I think it's going to be really, really cool. What else did I want to say? Oh yeah, so fun fact about you two, that you both recently moved to Amsterdam. I'm assuming that was independently of each other. I'm not sure. Like,
yeah,
just move the whole team
independently.
That's cool. So have you had much of a chance to sort of see your new city, given that there's an awful lot of lockdown going on?
On the streets, yes, and the city is beautiful, but in different places like cafes and bars, not yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
There's something to look forward to, at least.
Yep.
Oh, I love your t-shirt, Alina. I don't have one of those t-shirts. I'm so jealous. I'm wearing my old t-shirt from 1,000 years ago. Look at this, it's got the old logo on and everything.
Yeah, this new one, very nice.
Very cool. I love it. Great, awesome. So yes, I'm just trying to find out if there was anything else I was supposed to say. Alina, I will drop you off for now so that we can leave Olga to do her bit, and then we will see you again in a minute when it is your turn to do your bit. So I will drop you off. I will add Olga's screen so that we can start seeing what she's about to talk about. And yes, and I will see you a bit later on to ask you questions.
Great, thank you, Trisha. So hello, everyone. My name is Olga, as you already know, and you just met Alina. We are design leads for the IntelliJ platform UX team. And we are going to tell how we design user interfaces in IntelliJ IDEA. Firstly, let me introduce the UX team. The team started 7 years ago with me. I was a single designer for a couple of years, and then the team started to grow. We got a new designer each couple of years, but then more people started to join each year. And we are waiting for even more people. So this is the current state of the team. We have 8 UI UX designers and 1 type designer. Our team is distributed among 3 offices. 5 designers reside in St. Petersburg, 2 in Munich, and 2 in Amsterdam. I need to say that we design UI not only for IntelliJ IDEA. We work on the whole IntelliJ platform on which all our IDEs are built. So our UI designs for the platform get to all IDEs. Another important thing to say is that not only designers make design decisions in the IntelliJ family. We make user interfaces together with a great team of all kinds of engineers, product and marketing managers, technical writers, and developer advocates. So how do we do that? Usually we keep a few design goals in mind. The first is an obvious one: improve the user experience, or in other words, solve the problems our users experience with the UI. The next one is to keep the existing functionality. IntelliJ IDEA supports tons of user scenarios, and at the same time, it has lots of UI accumulated over the years. Sometimes we have to remove old user interfaces, but at the same time, we need to keep the existing functionality. The next one is make features discoverable, because we'd like developers to find all the useful features we have. At the same time, we don't want to clutter the screen with heaps of extra UI, so this might be a challenge. The fourth goal is protect user habits. IntelliJ IDEA is an everyday tool, and it forms strong habits. If you break them, people might get less productive, and this is not what we want. We do that only when we are really sure that the new way is better. The next one is be keyboard friendly. To make developers productive, we want to make all necessary features accessible with the keyboard. And the last one, support UI consistency. When you have as many user interfaces as we have, it might be a challenge to keep them all consistent. So it also becomes a goal in our case. Now we are going to tell how we try to reach all these goals in our everyday work through 3 stories about our user interfaces. And the first story is about refactorings, and in particular, the rename refactoring. As you know, refactorings are IDE features that allow you to improve code much faster than doing it by hand. For instance, renaming a Java method. You can do this manually. First, rename the declaration, and then any calls the method has. But a much quicker way would be to hit Shift F6 and launch the rename refactoring. With it, you need to type only in one place, and other places get renamed automatically. But there is a complication. If you have a commonly used name like getName here, the rename operation might take a really long time. Among other things, this might happen because of the rename options. You can see them only if you open the rename dialog by hitting Shift F6 twice. These checkboxes here, this one and this one, they make the search scope much wider, and this affects the refactoring speed. But you don't see these options by default. You see them only when you open the dialog. And we cannot just turn them off because they might be quite useful. And also, we don't want to show this dialog each time the refactoring is started, because these options are not changed often. So we decided to try and do something with that. There seemed to be no familiar UI pattern to show options right in the editor. So we decided to make a new one. The first design idea was to inline options into the completion pop-up here. So here are name suggestions, and here are options. This idea was out of the top of the head, and it didn't work very well. This is because 2 operation modes are mixed in this UI. The first one is that the pop-up closes if you choose the name variant and hit enter. But if you choose an option and hit enter, you might not want to close this pop-up. You might want to see if the change applied, and you might want to choose a name variant afterwards. So this is confusing. The next idea was to move the options to a separate menu so that we don't mix these 2 modes of operation. But how to show it? We already have a handy control that we call an inlay hint. We use it to show different additional information in the editor. Like in this case, it shows the parameter name in the method call. And one of our goals is to support UI consistency. So we want to reuse an existing control. Here's how it looks with the rename options. We put an option icon into the inlay and put options into the pop-up. This seems a bit better. However, when the menu is closed and you still wouldn't know what happens when you start the rename refactoring. And we want to make features discoverable. It's one of our goals. One of the smallest way to show something is to use an icon. So we decided to visualize the options that have the most effect on rename speed as icons. You can see what these icons mean if you open the pop-up. So the resulting flow is as follows. You start the refactoring and rename the method. Then you see that the option you don't need is on, as indicated by a blue icon. So you press tab to open the options pop-up, and then tab again to get to the second checkbox. Then you press space to turn it off and enter to complete the refactoring. This seems pretty keyboard friendly to me, as we use all the familiar and simple keyboard keys. But we missed one thing. When we released this UI change internally at JetBrains, our colleagues reported that they hit tab to complete the refactoring. And it was quite unexpected for them that tab started opening the pop-up. That is, here we go against the goal of protecting user habits. This particular habit comes from the regular completion pop-up. There, enter would insert the new text at the correct place, and tab would replace the whole symbol under the correct. And do enter and tab work the same in the rename refactoring? Developers are already used to tab. So we had no other choice as to change the shortcut. Finding a new shortcut that opens the options pop-up took us some time. That's because most shortcuts are already taken for many actions we have in IntelliJ IDEA. And we wanted to have something meaningful here. So we managed to find the shortcut with O for options. That's it with the rename refactoring. But this is not the only refactoring in IntelliJ IDEA. I'm sure you know. Another popular one is extract method. How does it work? You might want to break one method into several. You can do this by hand. First, you select a chunk of code, cut it, paste into the new place, add a signature to it, and add a code at the place you removed the chunk from. This sounds like a lot of actions. A much quicker way would be to press a shortcut for extract method. Here are the shortcuts for Windows and Mac. The shortcut opens a dialog where you enter the new method name, check the new signature in the yellow preview area, and hit the refactor button. And here's your new method. The obvious problem here is with the dialog itself. It's large, it covers the code, and it basically distracts you from writing it. And we think the less UI is the better. So we decided to try and make all the options in this dialog inline in the editor. But how to move all these options into the code? The first approach was the following. We insert the method call at the initial place. It's this line. Then jump to the new method signature, where you can change all the parameters same as they were in the big dialog. Additional options like checkboxes are shown under the gear icon. That is, we tried to keep all existing functionality in a pretty straightforward way. But here you move caret to a new place. And this caret jump might be quite big, and it might be hard to return to the original place of editing. So this doesn't seem like a good solution. The next version was to stay at the place where we extracted the code from, allow changing the method name, allow removing the parameters because they are already here in this line, and leave some options under the gear icon. But here we have to make some new and consistent control. We don't have these cross icons anywhere else in the editor. And if you would want to add a new parameter, you would still need to jump to the declaration. So the final version, here we decided to allow editing just the method name and left some checkboxes under the gear icon. These checkboxes might be quite useful if you want to quickly tweak the method. For instance, make it static if it's possible in the case of a particular method. So the resulting version looks as follows. You select some code, hit the shortcut, the caret doesn't jump, and you can edit the method name at the place where caret was. You can also modify some additional options under the gear icon if you need it. After you enter the name and hit enter for the first time you are using the extract method refactoring, we show a tooltip explaining how to quickly jump to the declaration to edit it if you need to do that. And we show this tooltip only once. If you press the go to declaration shortcut, you can then edit the new method signature as you see necessary. So we managed to remove the big dialog and keep the existing functionality by means of code editing only. That's it for me and for refactorings. And Tricia, could you please switch to Alina's slides for the other two stories?
So, hi again, my name is Alina, and I've been working as a UX designer in IntelliJ team for 4 years already. Today, I'd like to show you several more cases from my work. The first one is about initial start. As you know, today IntelliJ IDEA is 20 years old, and during all these years, more and more dialogues were added on the start. And last year, we decided to review the startup experience and to try to simplify it. So let's take a look how it worked before. Imagine that we start IntelliJ IDEA, and the first dialog that you see will be import settings. That suggests you to import settings from the previous IDE version. Let's select do not import and go to the next step. The second dialog is user agreement. We can just accept it and move next. Then you see another dialog. The UI of it is also different. And here, JetBrains asks us to share our usage statistics. Let's share it and move forward. Then we get to the customization wizard dialog. It consists of several steps. And on the first step, we suggest to select theme. Here are two themes. Actually, it's a bit outdated because now we have more. For example, we have a high contrast theme as well. And also we found out in usage statistics that most often people switch twice, so they return back to the default theme. The second step of the dialog is the launcher script. And here you can configure it for depending on your operation system. And then we get to the third step. It's plugins. Here you can enable or disable group of plugins depending on your needs. And the last step is featured plugins, where you can install some more plugins useful for you that JetBrains suggests you based on statistics. And finally, you get to the welcome dialog, where you can open a project or create a new one. So what we had, you need to go through 7 dialogues before you can actually start working with the code. One of our goals while reworking this flow was to improve UI and UX, so you can quickly start working with your code and creating projects. While on the other hand, we still wanted to keep all these existing functionality because it's rather useful. The second problem with this dialog was the initial customization dialog. People cannot return back to it. For example, if you want to configure theme, you would need to find it in the settings dialog, and the UI won't be the same. So we wanted to make these features discoverable, so you can easily return back to them when you already started working with your project. And also we wanted to make the UI consistent, so you do not need to learn different variations of UI for the same tasks. So I started to work on the solution, and the first thought was to simply improve the UI to make the dialogues consistent, at least the same shape, so they work kind of one wizard, and to enumerate steps, so you understand how many steps are left. But then I asked myself, do we really need an interface here? And together with the developer, we walked through all the possible scenarios for import settings, and we found out that we actually can automatically import settings if we found them, and if we found nothing, we can just not show this dialog. For the case, if you want to start from scratch and to reset all the settings, we just added an action restore default settings in the menu. For example, it's very useful for our testers. The second step was user agreement dialog, and unfortunately, we were not able to remove it completely because we are bound here with a legacy policy, and the same with data sharing. So we just unified the UI of this dialog and merged them in one wizard. The next step was to rework customization wizard and the welcome screen, and we started to explore different options. One of them was to put welcome screen in a tab, so you have all your recent projects on the left, and you have a customized section on the right. The plus of this approach is that you can create a tab just next to welcome and start working with the code, and you can always reopen this tab. But we are afraid to break user habits, because our users got used to the following scenarios. When you close all your projects, you get to the welcome screen, where you can open another project. And with the welcome tab, it can't be done. Another approach was to introduce the welcome tool window, so you can always open it and return to all customization things. But we also decided not to move that direction, because the tool window button will be always present, or you need to manually hide it, while most probably you do not need it while working with your project. One more approach was to introduce settings icon in the main screen with all the needed customization settings, but we're afraid that it won't be discoverable enough. So what was the final solution? We decided to merge customization wizard with the welcome screen. So welcome screen is familiar for our users, but here you can also return, quickly get to all the other settings. So what we have here, on the first page, we see projects, and here are three entry points. You can create project, open it, or clone from version control. When you open the same dialog for the second time, you see here the list of your recent projects. We also improved this screen a bit. For example, we added here a search field that was not present in the old welcome screen. We also added icons for projects so you can better distinguish them. And we left more space for project paths so you can also see full paths of the projects. The second tab is Customize, and here you configure theme or configure launcher script the same as you can do it on the old initial wizard. Now, we also added here accessibility section, so you can configure IDE font size and increase the scale of the IDE on the first start. Third page is plugins, and here we have two tabs, one marketplace and the second one installed. On the marketplace, you can install featured plugins, and on installed tab, you can enable or disable a group of bundled plugins. And also, this UI is the same as UI in settings, so it's consistent. We also added a fourth page here, it's Learn. Here you can start interactive course or get some help or resources. So instead of 7 dialogues, you now need to go only through 3 of them before you can start working with your project. But actually all the functionality is left, so you can just simply go to Customize tab and configure all the things that you need. What feedback we got about what are the challenges we faced while working on this task? We needed to introduce the same dialogue in all other IDs, for example, in Rider as well, and they have more actions, 6 of them. So here, for example, we can add 6 buttons, but the UI looks a bit cluttered, and it's even worse on this screen because if we try to add more buttons, it would look like this. So what we did with it, we introduced more actions link here. We put all other actions under it. We understand that it's probably a bit less discoverable, but on the other hand, these actions are more for pro users, so most probably for people who start the IDE for the first time, they won't be that needed. And on this screen, we put them under 3-dot icon. So what feedback did we get? It was mostly positive. People really liked the new welcome screen, but there is still room for improvement. For example, there can be one more licenses dialog that appears on the start for paid IDs, and it's also rather old and the UI is not very user-friendly. So what we have in mind is to replace it with a simple login dialog. So if you log in with your JetBrains account, we automatically start TL for you or get your license from your JetBrains account. So you do not need to configure it here. So this is it about the first case. And now let's move to the second about plugins. I worked on this case several years ago, and let's take a look how the old UI looked like. Plugin settings are appeared in settings dialog, and here you had the list of installed plugins, and the main scenario to install new plugin is hidden at the bottom. You need to find this button. And actually, there are 2 buttons. One is to install JetBrains plugin, and the second one is to browse repositories. So actually, before installing the plugin, you needed to decide what type of plugin you need, JetBrains or not JetBrains, and it can be not that easy when you actually do not know When you click this button, another dialog will open, and here you see the list of plugins that you can install and other detailed information about them. And on the left, there are icons, and actually icons are all the same. So they mostly cluttered the UI and didn't help you to find the needed plugin. In some scenarios, for example, if you want to add a custom plugin repository, even more dialog can open one over another, so there can be 4 model dialogs. Another thing that we wanted to fix is to add featured plugins to this dialog. You already saw them in the customization wizard. So we wanted to make them available on the settings dialog as well. How I started to solve this task. I decided to review different references, and the first one was the JetBrains plugins website that was released that day. And here we see the cards for each plugin. You can hover the plugin, click on it, and you'll get the plugin page. Sorry, to the plugin page. Here you see the detailed information about the plugin, description and images and so on. Actually, plugin management is present in many other systems as well. So, for example, the same is in App Store. Here you have cards for each application. You can click on it to see the detailed information. And exactly the same we see in the Chrome Web Store. You click on an extension and see the details. So we decided to use the same approach. We introduced cards for each plugin. Each plugin now have an icon, which is a plugin logo. It has a short description and some other useful information as number of downloads or rating of the plugin. You can click on the plugin to get to the plugin page to read details about it, and then you can return back to the plugins list. We released this version several years ago, but unexpectedly, we got lots of negative feedback. What problems did people face? One of them was the unclear navigation. It was hard for them to understand how it worked because it was the new pattern that it was never used before in our IDEs. Another problem was that we broke user habit. Before they can go through the list of plugins and quickly see the detailed description of the plugins. And now you need to click on each plugin to see the details about it. So we introduced the inconsistent UI, broke user habits, and we also broke one more user scenario. For example, if when you are searching for the plugin, you like to compare different plugins by their rating and number of downloads. And in our new UI, you need to follow that line to compare them, and it's actually not very convenient. So we realized that actually a solution that works for many other applications and websites didn't work for our IDE, and we decided to rework it. Before reworking it, we decided to make a UX study. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, we didn't have our own UX laboratory. We have now one, but that days we asked our colleagues from Android Studio team to help with that. So during the UX study, we realized that people really have problems with navigation and searching for plugins, but we also found out some more things. One of them was about the plugin card. People said that this tag and short plugin description is not very useful for them, as well as last update date. So we simplified the plugin cards to make it more clean, and we placed all this additional information in the plugin details part. Another finding was about search. In the first version, we introduced search with the completion. So you start typing and you see the suggestions in the pop-up and you can select them. But it was not very discoverable and clear for users. Actually, developers do not install plugins that often. So it was hard for them to remember all these syntaxes for the search. So we replaced it with a simple combo box as used in many websites and very common for people. So here is the version that we have now. Here we have the list of plugins on the left and the plugins descriptions on the right. You can quickly go through the plugins list and compare plugins by rating, for example. And also you can quickly go through the plugins and read the plugins descriptions on the right. But there are still some problems. For example, it's hard to see on what tab you're at the moment. And for example, if you're on installed tab and start searching for the plugin, we suggest you to search in Marketplace and switch to another tab. And it's not very convenient in some cases. Users ask us in tickets to merge these tabs in one, but we are afraid that way we can broke some other user scenarios. So we are still thinking how to improve that behavior. So that's it about the case. And today we wanted to show you based on our cases, how we are balancing between our goals. So we are trying to improve UX to make it more functionality, more discoverable, and to make the UI consistent. While on the other hand, we are trying to keep all the functionality that IntelliJ IDEA have now and to protect users' habits as well. Thank you very much. If you have any further questions, please contact me or Olga. Sorry, there should be one more slide with thanks word and our emails. Yeah, carry this.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I've got you both on the stream at the same time, so I can ask you both questions. And I'll keep your Alina. I'll keep your screen on so people can see your email addresses if they need to contact you. We had a few questions we wanted to ask you. The first one was a comment actually, which was a comment from Mala, but I think most of us agree with it. It was really interesting to see how much effort goes into making the UI really sort of minimal. It seems obvious that to remove things should be easy, but actually certainly seeing the first example for the extract method, getting things so there's less stuff on the screen, but still discoverable and still accessible. It clearly takes quite a lot of work to do that kind of thing. And I think as users, we don't necessarily appreciate that. That was just a comment, really. I don't need an answer to that other than, yes, I'm sure it is. Okay, there was a question about, okay, there's lots of comments rather than questions. One of the questions which I found really interesting was, are developers different types of users to normal users? I don't really know what that means, but like, is it difficult to design for developers because developers have a particular way of thinking, or they're perhaps power users as opposed to a simple, I don't know, another type of user?
I guess there are a few things. The one, for instance, is that IntelliJ IDEA and all our other IDEs are very keyboard-centric. And one of our real challenges is finding shortcuts right now, because almost all nice shortcuts are already taken. And we have to keep this thought that we should be keyboard-friendly for any design we are doing. So this is the thing. Another thing, I guess, is that the IDE is an everyday application, and people really get used to that. So changing anything requires a very careful thinking, not to break any really important habits.
I found that one of the most interesting parts of that talk, because one of the things I'm always trying to tell developers when I'm trying to help them use IntelliJ IDEA is to develop that muscle memory. So people are asking me what the keyboard shortcuts are, and I'm like, I don't know what the keyboard shortcut is. I know it looks like this. And so I guess once people have developed their muscle memory, you have to very carefully bear that in mind when you're thinking about changing functionality or adding functionality. Like you were saying about pressing tab to move to the cog icon, because a lot of people use tab for the drop-down completion. So trying to cater for the user's muscle memory and not break their habits. It's interesting.
That is, yes. And muscle memory, as I know, is the worst thing to break, because if you change something visual, you have at least some cues on the screen for that. So you see it looks a bit different, but maybe it's in the same place, at least. Or it looks the same, but a bit to the left or to the right. It moved somewhere, for instance. But with muscle memory, you don't have any hints what changed. And it's harder.
I remember when we introduced not having the modal window for commit. The modal dialog for commit. So now that if you enable it in the most recent IDEs, you get the new commit window. And the first time when I was using the new commit window, I'm pressing. I want to say. I can't even remember, because it's whatever keyboard shortcut I used to get I was trying to get to the log window, but it wasn't taking me to the log window because we had the new commit window and we had the git log window, and I was really confused about how my keyboard shortcuts were not doing what I expected. And but that was in one of the early access things, and I think that got resolved as part of the process. So I'm assuming that for you, the early access stuff, the nightly builds as well, that with our own internal developers dog fooding the product, that must be really important feedback for you to find out if something needs to change before a big release.
Yeah, that's true. I personally consider our UX team lucky in that respect, because we have developers all around us, and we can ask them questions if we have them, and we can ask them about the new user interfaces and about how they use the old user interfaces, and it's great.
Yeah, we also actually have nightly builds, so our developers install a new version of the IDE every morning. So if we change anything, developers will come rather quickly to us and say us about it if something is very bad or, yeah.
That was a very polite way of saying the developers will scream at us that things don't work the way I expect them to.
Yeah,
I'm actually contemplating using the nightly build for my demo a bit later on, but I'm like, I'm not sure if I should use the nightly build for that or use a stable build.
Yeah, stable sounds safer.
It does sound safer. Okay, so I had some more comments and suggestions. There was something, actually, it was something that you mentioned, Olga, in the rehearsal about keeping, was it about keeping existing features or about keeping the existing, oh my goodness, I can't even remember. I've made notes that I can't even read. Something about keeping existing features or keeping, am I misremembering?
Yeah, existing functionality, yes.
Yes. And about how that's not necessarily obvious that we always need to keep existing functionality, because the IDE, it does need to, actually, here's my question. Let me form it into a question. The IDE does have to evolve. You are adding new features all the time. You are also, as you showed, not just adding new features, but trying to improve the existing features. Like, I didn't really know that extract method needed to be improved until you improved it. So you're constantly involving the IDE. And in fact, I think Valentin even mentioned that in the keynote, that the user experience, the user interface is constantly improving. So there must be a balance between adding new features, improving existing functionality, and retaining old stuff that, I don't know, like, how do we know if we can delete any of that stuff? And you were talking about how the keyboard shortcuts are like all already used. So how do you balance the legacy with moving the IDE forwards?
Mm-hmm. Well, like with the extract method, one of the way to balance it is to sometimes we have several ways to do the same. Like with the refactorings, we have inline refactorings in editor for some refactorings like rename or introduce variable. But for some refactorings we had big dialects still, model dialects. And also for extract method, what you need to change is already in the code. And you have, for instance, the refactoring change signature. That's kind of the next step or a sibling of extract method. So we can try and use only one method, use only what's already there. For instance, what's already there in the editor to do the same stuff and not add extra interfaces on top of that. And that's what we really want to do, because it's a challenge to keep all this, to support all these interfaces. And it's a challenge to make them all discoverable, because we have really lots of stuff in IntelliJ IDEA in terms of interfaces. Well, so one way is to just leave one method of doing something and make this method the most convenient and most discoverable. Yes. Alina, could you, do you have something to?
Yeah, we are also trying to simplify some UIs based on the usage statistics. For example, we can check it, and if we realize that not many people, few of them, for example, less than 1% of people use some functionality, we can probably move it, not show it for all the people, and put it under some more advanced options and so on. So this is another way of improving UIs. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked that you mentioned that in the welcome screen, that sometimes you don't have to. The balance between discoverability, making stuff visible, versus actually some stuff is only used by a small subsection, so we can just hide those, not hide them, but put them somewhere slightly less in your face. I thought that was an interesting way of reaching that balance. Right, so I do have a question here. How much thought goes into accessibility when designing the new UX UI? How difficult is it to maintain a good level of accessibility? I've tried working with a keyboard screen reader only, and it isn't as easy as it may seem.
With this accessibility, we try to support it on the platform level to make all our basic components and dialects accessible, like, for instance, for the screen reader. And currently, it's more of a technical problem. So the design decisions are mostly clear here. So we don't have to invent anything new usually, because rules for accessibility are already there. They're supported by different operation systems, by different applications, and we just need to support them as well. And we have some technical questions around that. And our platform UI team has been constantly working on that and continues to work. So I hope it will improve with time.
So it is a key. Sorry, Alina, carry.
Yeah. We always trying to keep that in mind, and we actually have it kind of in our checklist. For example, if a designer creates a new solution, we are usually asked about accessibility. Will this, for example, new control will accessible? How it will work with the keyboard and screen readers and so on. So we try to keep it in mind always. But yeah, probably not all the features are covered with accessibility at the moment, but we are working on it.
Okay, so it is a key thing that's on your list of things to be aware of. I have a sort of similar related question, which is around, I know that not me personally, JetBrains has been working on internationalization, localization actually, so that the UI can be translated into different languages. Is that something which that either of you have any experience in that here? For example, I remember when I did this for one of the websites, I used to work at a major automotive organization, and we had to translate our websites into German, and we had all sorts of problems with the sizing of things when you've got different languages. Is this a challenge that you've been facing here as well?
I can't say it was really a challenge for the UX team, at least. We had to change some wording at several places, but if I remember correctly, the reason was mostly that the initial wording might not have been really clear, so we had to improve it both in English and in other languages. Yep. And mostly that was an effort on the side of our technical writers team and various developer teams across our IDEs.
Yeah, that's something I found interesting about when you mentioned that the UI and the UX it's not just the remit of like you two or even like half a dozen people, but it's everyone. It's the developers have to come up with, obviously I assume the developers are kind of the first port of call. They're saying, let's add a button here, or let's add this feature here. So it's a sort of organizational effort to make the usability, the user experience and the user interface as good as it can be.
It is, yes.
Okay, what else have we got? Well, I've got a few good questions, but the first thing I was thinking was that Igor said in the last session that the debugger needs a little bit of love in terms of the simplifying the user interface. Is that something that you're going to be involved in or have been involved with, or is there anything you can talk about around that?
Yeah, we are working on it at the moment, and there are already some mock-ups were discussed, some approaches. Yeah, actually, the simplified debugger version was already introduced in Rider. Probably some of you have already seen it. And we are thinking about taking some of the same decisions to IDEA, to simplify debugger. Yeah, so we are working on it. And I think that Igor also mentioned it as well. And so yeah. I hope maybe not the upcoming release, but this year, the simplified version will be released.
Until you mentioned it, I hadn't really thought about it, but the debugger, particularly the debugger tool window, is very much about buttons. There's like buttons everywhere and like menus when you right click on something. Like he was showing stuff today that I must have seen in the menu 20 million times, but I've never read it because the menus are sort of so full of all the different options that you just gloss over them. So I'm really interested. It's clearly a challenging problem. I'm really interested to see how that's going to evolve over the next few releases or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here the main one part of it is to make it easy to start for newcomers. So you see all the main options at the first, but you on the other hand can quickly get more advanced options. Yeah, and the other problem that we are trying to solve as well is many icons. As you know, in IDEA there are lots of them, and not all of them can be very clear. Yeah, so we are trying to get rid of some of them, probably replace them with buttons with labels so they are more clear if it's possible. Yeah, so we are trying different approaches.
I love, speaking of buttons and labels, I remember it's probably quite a few years back now, but when the UI was changed to unify a lot of the different buttons and the icons changed, this must be, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and everyone went mad. They were like, oh my goodness, my buttons look completely different. And then like 3 months later, they've completely forgotten that everything's changed and they know exactly where everything is. But people do have that like, who's moved my cheese type attitude of, oh, the button is now it's a flattened arrow instead of a raised arrow and I don't like it anymore. How do you filter out what is just what is something that the users are going to train themselves into getting used to versus, no, this is actually a usability problem which actually needs to be addressed?
I think that icons are very kind of visible and they are everywhere. So people really got used to the appearance of the icon, and when you change them, it looks like the whole ID changed. Yeah, it was a rather challenging task to rework all the icons. I actually worked on this task. Yeah, so we tried to introduce the system for the icons, because before the colors were used randomly, and we tried to add a kind of semantic for all the color, and to reduce the number of colors so that you can better understand why and where each color is used. And the same about icons shapes. We tried to simplify them and to make more clear. Yeah, we got a lot of negative feedback as well, but there were also a lot of positive. But after some times, I think that people got used to new icons, and also there were users who come to us after several months and said that, oh, I like new icons. I accidentally switched to old version, and I do not like all the icons anymore. Something like this. So yeah, I think it's a question of habit as well.
Yeah, definitely. That was my experience as a user. I was a bit like, oh, my UI looks completely different and I don't like it. And about like 3 weeks later, I'm like, oh no, why would I go back to that old thing? This is much better.
Yeah.
We get used to things. We get used to things the way they are. Is that the, what would you say is like the biggest challenge that you faced so far in terms of UI UX?
That's a tricky question.
Sorry.
Yes, maybe it would require more thought, but out of the top of the head, I suppose for me it might be the domain itself, because I'm not a developer myself. I know a bit about it, but mostly I rely on my colleagues to get me into this world. And so I'd say it's that after several years working as a UX designer for this product, I already know much more than I knew when I just started. But still, there are so many knowledge in the programming world that I'm still learning what people do there, what technologies they use, and how they are using them. So,
Alina, okay. Alina, what do you think your biggest challenge was? Was it the icons or was it something else?
The biggest challenge, I think that for me, still the biggest challenge is that the IDE have that many users, and all users have their own different habits, and it's very hard to always keep in mind all of them, not to forget about anything. Yeah, so many users, and that our IDE is an everyday tool. I think it's the most challenging things.
And this is another question you might not actually be able to answer because you don't know if you're working on it yet. Are there any interesting problems that you have worked on or are working on but haven't solved yet? Like, is there something that's kind of annoying you about usability or the user interface, which you haven't been able to come up with a solution that you're happy with yet? It's fine to say, no, everything's perfect. I fixed everything.
No, I don't think so. What I have in mind is probably search. We are trying to improve it. It's like search everywhere, search by go to class, go to action, and all these other tabs. And it's rather challenging to understand how to better improve it. We are not sure that the current approach is the best one. We are introducing now a set of UX studies to see how people use it. So, for example, probably we are thinking maybe we do not need search everywhere, kind of all tab at all. Probably we need to have project and action tabs, 2 of them, or we still need all. So this is an open and rather hard question. Yeah, and it also depends on different scenarios. For example, how big is your project. In some scenarios, some type of search works better, like search everywhere. So for big projects, it doesn't work. So yeah, it's rather tricky question to answer what direction better to move, and we are trying to investigate it now.
I think that's a really interesting topic, actually, because for me, I'm still, as a user, I'm still trying to train myself to use search everywhere. I generally tend to use the direct keyboard shortcuts for either class or file or action. And I would like, in theory, to just have one keyboard shortcut where I can do all of those things, but it's not really the same thing. Like if I know I'm going to a class, then I don't want to search everywhere for a class called thing. I want to go directly to the class. So as a user as well, I've been trying to figure out the most efficient way to use those sets of searches. So I can see how it's an interesting challenge for you.
Yeah, actually, in my perfect world, we will have one search field like in Google. So you search and you always have what you need in 2 or 3 top results.
Right. Right. And for me, when I'm trying to tell people how to use IntelliJ IDEA, instead of giving them 4 or 5 different keyboard shortcuts, I wanted to just give them just search everywhere so that they can get to that thing. But I can see there are challenges around that. So for example, if I type, so here's my classic example. If I type Gradle, I will end up with the build.gradle file, the Gradle tool window, Gradle settings. And so it must be impossible to go directly to that thing that I'm thinking of, because I'm just typing one word Gradle. I'm not psychically controlling my computer.
That's true.
Yeah.
Any last points before we wrap this up?
I'm not sure. It was exciting to give this talk. I'm really glad to do that, to tell about how we work, how we design interfaces in IntelliJ IDEA.
Thank you very much for giving the talk, because I learned a lot about how difficult your job is.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add, please do not hesitate to contact us if you have any suggestions or anything else in mind. We are always ready to talk with our users.
Great,
Yes, and
absolutely.
one last point. Trisha, you mentioned that our work is difficult, but I think it's at the same time very rewarding for a designer, because you have different and interesting tasks, you have different problems, you have lots of users with lots of scenarios, and this is an exciting challenge, truly.
That's cool. That's a great note to end this on. So yes, let's say goodbye. Thank you so much, Olga and Alina. That was a really good talk, really helpful. And I'm looking forward to that being available on YouTube so I can point people to it later on. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.